the British Museum and Repatriation. Hi, I'm Lilly Wood, and thank you for tuning in. Here we're engaged in a closer look at some of the arguments revolving around museums, returning of artifacts, and some activism that you can engage in and be part of these discussions. Now first let's learn a little bit more about the British Museum. The British Museum's collections are quite vast. Most well known is its Egyptian collection, holding over 50,000 artifacts, including the Rosetta Stone and a 5,000-year-old mummy, as well as the sculptures of Ramses II. But they have more than just Egyptian artifacts. They have artifacts that come from all over the world, quite a few from areas connected by the Silk Road. There's Islamic coins, Islamic worked metal, Tang Dynasty tomb figurines, some of the largest that were ever found, jade ornaments, paintings from Korea, Japan, India, pottery, vases, and Buddhist statues, ranging from the 1st century AD all the way up to the 1500s and beyond. Now, a lot of people are very familiar with the British Empire's colonization and mistreatment of the people that they colonized. And there are many who feel that the museum should return artifacts, because a lot of them believe that the artifacts have actually been stolen away. Another form of protest came from AHDAF SOLEIF, an award-winning Egyptian author who even went on to create a literary festival. She was a member of the museum's board of trustees, and she resigned from her position in protest to what she felt was the museum's unrelenting stance on repatriation. She says, on the issue of restitution, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. It has to be a case-by-case deliberation, and the solutions must stretch across the whole spectrum, which ranges from the object remaining where it is in the Colonial Museum, but is provided with appropriate context, to the object returning to the location where it was made, with lots of varied possibilities in between. She seems to imply that this whole scenario and this issue is far more complicated than it seems at first. The museum has these artifacts that they have probably stolen or at least acquired illegally. They should belong where they came from, right? The British Museum has an interesting perspective. Tiffany Jenkins is quoted trying to remind people of the positive things that museums can do. They're showing off different cultures and times and places to different people. They're educational institutions, and she doesn't want us to forget this. A museum representative says, internationally, the museum works extensively in partnership with other museums across the globe to consider, understand, and reflect complicated shared histories. We lend many thousands of objects all over the world. For example, we have committed to lending objects on a rotating basis within a 3-year time frame. But that's just lending things. It's not returning things to where they belong. Well, an answer to that is the British Museum Act of 1963, which forbids the museum from removing any object in its collection. Section 3(4). Objects vested in the trustees as part of the collections of the museum shall not be disposed of by them otherwise than under Section 5 or 9 of this Act. Section 5. Trustees of the British Museum may sell, exchange, give away, or otherwise dispose of any object vested in them and comprised in their collections if A. The object is a duplicate of another such object, or B. The object appears to the trustees to have been made not earlier than the year 1850 and substantially consists of printed matter of which a copy made by photography or a process akin to photography is held by the trustees, or C. In the opinion of the trustees, the object is unfit to be retained in the collections of the museum and can be disposed of without detriment to the interests of students, provided that where an object has become vested in the trustees by virtue of a gift or bequest, the powers conferred by this subsection shall not be exercisable as respects that object in a manner inconsistent with any condition attached to the gift or bequest. Trustees may destroy or otherwise dispose of any object vested in them and comprised in their collections if satisfied that it has become useless for the purpose of the museum by reason of damage, physical deterioration, or infestation by destructive organisms. Transfers Section 9. Transfers to other institutions. Any movable property vested in the trustees of either museum may be transferred by them to the trustees of the other museum, and any pictures vested in the trustees of either museum may be transferred by them to an institution listed in the first schedule to the National Gallery and Tate Gallery Act 1954. Where property transferred under this section became vested in the transferors by virtue of a gift or bequest, it shall be dealt with by the transferees as if acquired by them under a like gift or bequest. Now, Dr. Neil Spencer, the keeper of the Nile Valley and Mediterranean collections at the British Museum, says that today's perspective of history is very reductive and is emblematic of the information age we live in. I think, particularly in the media and social media, there's a sense that everything in the British Museum is stolen. There's actually a very complex array of ways that things came into the British Museum. The museum doesn't just steal things or acquire things and then display them for the education of others. The museum takes an active stance in returning stolen artifacts. But that doesn't seem very true. Enter recent history. In 2001, the Taliban government of Afghanistan ordered the destructions of many artifacts in Afghan museums, a lot of it involving the decapitation of human figurines and the just throwing out of anything else. When the Taliban was overthrown, many people finally had the ability and the courage to smuggle the artifacts out and then sold them on the black market. And since 2009, the British Museum has helped return over 2,300 artifacts to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Uzbekistan. Most of the objects have been a result of illegal trafficking. So the museum worked very hard with authorities to identify, catalog, and return thousands of antiquities from all periods to Afghanistan, Iraq, and they even returned a monumental glazed medieval tile to Uzbekistan that must have been very valuable. And I mean, it is a museum. So while they had the objects and were preparing to, were going through all of the paperwork, they did actually have an exhibit at the top of these stairs in room 53 where they displayed some of the objects that they'd rescued from the black market. So where does that leave us? The issue of repatriation and restitution is clearly very complex, and there are many different sides to it. Obviously, a museum's stakes are much higher than what we would think of as an individual's stakes, because the museum is trying very hard to share knowledge. And while culture should never be misrepresented, and the people that the objects were made, the ancestors for the people's ancestors that made the objects should really get a say in what happens to those. But sometimes objects come out of areas that don't have enough resources to properly look after those objects, which is probably why AHDAF earlier had mentioned that sometimes it's better for objects to remain in the colonial museum that they were brought to, because they're just better taken care of there. But there's, like she said, there's a wide range of possibilities and a lot of things to consider. So definitely investigate and get involved. As I showed earlier, there are protests and people have protested at museums. Find a cause, find a side of the story that you really just feel very passionately about, and use that to engage actively in this debate. It is ongoing. It is still strong in a lot of circles. Definitely bring it to some people's consideration. Ask your friends, ask your family, hey, what do you think of repatriation in museums, and where does that leave us? Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves now.